It's the Security Weekly News. It's episode 282. I'm Doug White, and today it's the week of 19 March 2023. We've got the Tang Dynasty, ZippyShare, NuGet, or NuGet. I don't know how you say it. I was using NuGet. PinDuoDuo, Ernie, Lantern, HDD hard drives, and more on this edition of the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
How is your business staying one step ahead of cybercriminals? Secure your email applications, network, and data with Barracuda. Protect your business and go from zero to security in no time flat. Whether your team is working in one location or many, Barracuda has solutions that are easy to buy, deploy, and use. Learn how Barracuda can protect your business against ransomware, phishing, and other cyber attacks. Visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Barracuda, your journey secured. All right. Well, just for reference purposes, the Tang Dynasty in China ran from about 618 to 907 AD. And I know it's kind of mysterious, but it keeps coming up today. So that I just wanted to preface that. Well, ZippyShare, if you've never heard of it, and you may have, you may have not, it depends. But ZippyShare is a file sharing site that started way back in 2006. And it was a early free way to, share files back before, Dropbox took over the industry. And I don't even, maybe Dropbox was around then too, but I remember seeing ZippyShare way back then. But they announced yesterday that they are going to shut down the ZippyShare service forever. Which means if you do have any files on there that you're sharing and they're not backed up, you probably need to move them off or back them up or something before the end of the month, which is like 20 days from now. So if you actually do use this service, you might want to do something. The operators of ZippyShare said that they can no longer afford to keep it running due to diminishing revenue. And this is a free site, so all the revenue came from ads, and ZippyShare was pretty famous for having lots and lots and lots of ads. It was one of those early sites that just pop up. They also said the cost of electricity has increased, and they have this big server infrastructure, so all that together kind of created a death knell for the site. They didn't say death knell. That was me, I think. It could have been somebody else, but maybe somebody was standing near me and said death knell, but death knell. But they did say that because so many users are now using aggressive ad blocking and anti-malware and anti-ads and all this other stuff, not to mention identity hiding and all these other kinds of things, it really hurts their ad revenue because, if you block all of that stuff, then the click-throughs don't happen and all this stuff that they're making revenue from, so their revenue is probably falling off. And they did have a lot of ads. I mean, the last time I looked at ZippyShare, which has been a while, it was one of those sites where, it just went crazy and you're like, yeah, I'm not using this. I'll set up my own server before I'll do this. But considering the people that use ZippyShare, it really does surprise me that a lot of their users were there because they didn't want to be tracked. They didn't want to subscribe to services. They didn't want to enter, personal information, and they wanted to be anonymous. ZippyShare is often listed as a top site for pirated music, so they've been cited many, many times. They have an Alexa rating of 278 in India, so they're pretty well known there, and they have a lot of ads specific to the Indian market. Rumor is that it's based in France, but a lot of people do use it, so I wanted to let, if you do use it for anything or you have any old stuff out there. I know people used to put photos and stuff on there. Some Windows 11 users reported seeing security warnings that indicated the local security authority protection, which is called LSA, had been disabled on their machine, even though when they went and checked, it showed that it was actually running. The LSA component, if you're not familiar with it, is a security feature of Windows that blocks process memory dumping. So this means that some of those good old day kind of things where people used to grab passwords and stuff out of memory and other credential stuff out of memory don't work because LSA prevents that from happening, and it requires you to go through a process to get there. So you can no longer, pull those kind of hacks off. It also prevents untrusted code from being injected into all those processes. So all those logins and logouts and code management and password management processes. But Windows users started reporting this recently, and they blamed a recent patch But according to article, they've been reporting this since back in the 15th of January. So it may not be this current patch. It may be something else. Maybe it's a combination of patches. The warning that comes up says local security authority protection is off. Your device may be vulnerable. And it doesn't appear to be malware. It appears to be it sounds like malware, but it actually appears to be some kind of a glitch, because Microsoft said, quote, "This is a technical glitch that if the feature is on, regardless of the message," and they were working on a fix. So any day now. They do have in this article some manual steps that will disable the alert, which sounds kind of scary to me. But they also have a way to check your system to see if you should be concerned. Is it actually on and you're just getting alerts, or has it been turned off in the past or whatever? So yeah, if you're getting those, you may want to follow that carefully. I'm sure somebody will exploit it real soon too. .NET developers are being targeted with cryptocurrency stealing software, which is delivered via the NuGet repository, or NuGet. I don't know how you say it. The malware packages are things that have been uploaded, and they pretend to be multiple legitimate packages. And we've seen this so many times, but they use typo squatting, a la PyPy and all these other kind of repositories that we've seen this done in. So they basically get you to download something that you think you want, or a feature, but the name is slightly different. 3 of the packages in this had been downloaded more than 150,000 times within a month, according to a JFrog security report. The 3 top packages were Coinbase.core, which is impersonating Coinbase. So it's called Coinbase with a .core at the end of it. So if the window's not big enough, you won't actually see that other part, or maybe you don't even know that. Anarchy.wrapper-net, which was impersonating Anarchy-wrapper. So they put a dot in there to try to fool you. And Discord-rich-presence.api, which was impersonating Discord-rich-presence. So those are obviously packages that people are wanting, but there's these fake packages dumped in there as well. So if you pick the wrong one, you got a problem. The package downloads and executes a PowerShell dropper, which is called init.ps1, and that configures the local machine to allow PowerShell execution without any restrictions. So it basically puts it in full-on admin mode, which means it can do anything at once. Then it proceeds to download a second stage payload, which currently is a custom Windows executable. JFrog said this was kind of unusual since most of these types of droppers use open source hacking tools and basic malware. But this malware basically steals crypto by exfiltrating your crypto wallets on that particular system. Using Discord webhooks, and then there was a bunch of other actions it could take to extract various different kinds of wallets so that they could basically drain them of money. The article said this action was part of a much larger campaign, with the attackers uploading more than 144,000 phishing packages on various repositories, including NPM, PyPy, and NuGet. Last year, and they said it was active all last year. So be very careful when you're downloading add-ons. I know I love downloading API add-ons and libraries to play with, and you jump in there and you Google something and you search for a library you've heard about, and there's a whole bunch of things listed there. It's really, really easy to download the wrong one. So I would really recommend, if you're doing that, you may want to set up a sandbox work area to download these first if you haven't done that already, so that when you're downloading all these repositories, libraries, and APIs from various sites, you can actually make sure it's going to do what you think it's going to do before you actually enable it on other systems. Google has suspended the Chinese shopping app PinDuoDuo. I got to say it correctly. PinDuoDuo, which is they deleted it from the Play Store because they said they found versions of the app that include malware. Now, if you don't know, PinDuoDuo is an app that started out, it's kind of one of these gig market apps that was in China, and it allowed buyers to associate with that wanted certain fresh produce to find farmers that had that produce to sell, like that day. And if you've ever been to China, or people that are from China, you know that one thing about real Chinese cooking is they want everything to be massively fresh. And I mean fresh. Like, you don't want, there used to be a restaurant on 26th, I think, in Manhattan that was called the Fresh Kill Chicken Restaurant. And, they actually had live chickens there, and you went in and ordered, and they would, and I'm telling you, it makes a difference. And it's a thing, and it's why all the food in China is so good. But anyway, the desire for all this fresh food drove the app from 0 users to 1.9 billion with a B in revenue in 2018, and by 2022, last year's revenue was 18.9 billion US dollars. No kidding. Bloomberg reported yesterday, though, that the app had been suspended. Google claims that the infected version of PinDuoDuo were hosted outside of Play, but that they were going to ban it anyway, which the article kind of started saying that sounded kind of fishy, but maybe in the context of China. Now, so far, the company has made no statement about how they got infected and so forth, but the article speculated that the infection that was seen probably came from a local app store in China, because in China, they have what's called the Great Firewall, and the Great Firewall prevents a lot of stuff, so they have all these local app stores that get set up. So probably what happened is the app that was infected was pushed into a local app store. Google heard about it and said, well, we don't know, so we're just going to ban the thing. It also makes me want to get Chinese food, but not here. It makes me want to get Chinese food in Nanjing. So, yeah, really. And speaking of China, another AI tool that is now about to be released is called Ernie. And it is a large language model-based chatbot, so very much like GPT-4 or any of these other chatbots, Bing Bot, and all this other stuff that's coming out. But this one is produced by Baidu, which is a Chinese-based web company, a very large Chinese-based web company. So Baidu announced that as of 27th of March, the tool would be available so that, quote, enterprises of different types can choose cloud services and products based on their own needs, enabling them to quickly and cost-effectively build their own models and applications using this kind of back end. Now, Ernie is a Chinese version of GPT-4, and the Ernie wait list currently has over 870,000 people waiting to get this when it goes live. And those are just for the free user side of it. They're currently taking enterprise applications as well for API testing, and they have over 100,000 applications in the queue for that. So this thing is, it's definitely got a lot of people interested. Now, users have reported that there are flaws in this bot, and they were comparing questions. And there were some examples. One of the citations there had the bot reply, "I love you" about 100 times. It was all in Chinese. And but to be fair, the U.S.-based bots do pretty weird stuff too. And we've seen so many reports of ChatGPT, GPT-4, Bing Bot, and so forth behaving in strange ways. Ernie has been billed as being able to generate images of flowers very accurately, and it can also generate, this is one of their big selling points, Tang Dynasty style poetry, if you aren't familiar with that. Now, I'll talk about it in a minute. An additional Reuters report said that Ernie is quite reserved when it comes to answering questions about Chinese President Xi Jinping and is oddly silent on the matter. They also said that questions about Tiananmen Square, which was a famous, infamous massacre a long time ago in China. Tiananmen Square is the big square in Beijing where Mao's crypt is and all that stuff. If you've been to Beijing, you've probably been to Tiananmen Square. But there was a famous thing there. And they also said questions about the Uyghur people were declined or met with suggestions that were very vague and not very accurate. And my question to the writer was, have you ever been to China? Because let me tell you, Chinese people in China are oddly silent and vague when it comes to those topics as well. So, maybe the people training it were just being vague when they got asked questions about their leader or about Tiananmen Square. But now Tang Dynasty poetry, hold me back. Come on. Honestly, Tang Dynasty poetry is really cool. The poems... Oh, then this is from a long, long time ago, but there's all these different styles, and one of the styles is called Shi, and the Shi poems actually have 4 characters on 5 lines, and I don't remember all the rules, but there's and they make these boxes of characters, and they're kind of like these haiku, stylized poems, but they also have these weird tricks in them where you can read them backwards and forwards and sideways, and they mean different things, and it's a very interesting thing. To me anyway, but there's all these different styles of it, and so and I've had Chinese friends point out, did you notice that if you read this backwards? I'm like, no, I can't read it that well, but I can't read Chinese, even close to being able to interpret these without help. And they were all written in ancient Chinese anyway, which is very different as well. But my friend did tell me how it worked. But this poem here, for instance, from 750 AD, was written by a very famous Tang Dynasty poet named Du Fu. And it says, the wagons rumble and roll, the horses whinny and neigh, the conscripts each have bows and arrows at their waist, the parents, wives, and children run to see them off. So much dust stirred up, it hides the Xiangyang Bridge. They pull their clothes, they stamp their feet, and weeping bar the way. I mean, it was just a very famous, apparently, Tang Dynasty poem. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And I actually did get I made one, and I got ChatGPT to write one too. But anyway, since we're doing international news today, a protest chant in Iran is women, life, freedom. This has been going on for months after the death of a 22-year-old Kurdish woman named Mahsa Amini. And Amini died while in the custody of the Gasht Irshad, which is the morality police in Iran. And if you think you want to live in a theocracy, you might just want to look at Iran a little more closely. But anyway, Amini died after being arrested for not wearing the correct dress under the Islamic dress codes. That's what this police group does. But anyway, that's a very important story and all, but that was really not what we're here for. The tech part of this was about how after these protests started, the Iranian government started restricting internet access. So they blocked the popular app stores. They blocked social media, starting with WhatsApp and Instagram. And then in southeastern Iran in February, they actually blocked all internet access altogether. So this is, again, like stuff you see in China and Russia and so forth. But it's kind of scary. But it's all started to mean that people there that were using the internet, they got really nervous because they were worried the government was watching what they're questioning, what they're searching for, and so forth. And, if you look at the internet and you type the wrong question in, all of a sudden somebody shows up at your house and starts asking you a lot of questions, maybe in a not very friendly way. So a lot of people started using VPNs to get around all these bans and blocks and monitoring, because that was how we watched Netflix in China because it was banned. Hide My Ass should sponsor my show because I've told that story so many times. But again, that's not really the point of the story. The point is that as more people started using VPNs, the government and other governments as well have started moving to block VPN access or control VPN access. And they've even considered making the sale of VPNs a criminal action in Iran. A parliamentary special advisor who's overseeing this internet restriction bill condemned human rights groups and then called for the execution. And I don't mean like make them run. I'm like execution, like hang you from a pole somewhere. Called for the execution of people selling VPNs. An anonymous employee of Lantern, which is one of the oldest Iranian VPN providers, said, we are constantly, quote, we're constantly getting attacked by the Iranian government. So we are in this constant state of looking at the data, listening to users, and trying to come up with completely new techniques to keep everyone online. It may be time to think about how you will connect when they try to block everything for you. Now, this kind of fascism stuff can happen anywhere. And, I know my friend Lou had a ham radio set that he could use with Morse code so he could get news or whatever, even if everything else was shut down. I wonder what kind of bandwidth do you get on a ham radio? But you may want to think about that. Going forward, what happens when your government, wherever it is, suddenly decides that you shouldn't be allowed to look at a certain thing? And that doesn't happen as much in the United States, but it could. And we see all these bans coming in now, banning this book and that book, and you can't read this and you can't see that and you can't say this at school and on and on and on. And that stuff gets kind of scary because I wonder how long it's going to be before some of these people that are banning everything start banning what you can look at. So you might want to have a plan. A claim about hard drives said that after a study of 2007 damaged or defective HDD hard drives, the firm's Secure Data Recovery, which, as the name implies, does data recovery, found, among other things, that, quote, the most durable and resilient hard drives from each manufacturer were made before 2015. Now, they blamed the size of the drives because they got bigger, and that meant they had tolerance issues because, the bigger they got, the less tolerance they had on the drives. And they also blamed SMR for some of the more, which is used on some of the more recent drives instead of CMR. And if you don't know what that means, SMR HDD hard drives are shingled magnetic recording disks versus the conventional magnetic recording CMR type drives. And SMR is essentially what they do is they put everything in a buffer and then they write a lot of tracks and they overlap each other. And I don't know exactly how the mathematics of that works, how the writing works, but they basically have all this stuff written on top of itself and, they jam more and more data on the drive. SMR has been controversial ever since it came out. There are people say that it's really slow. It depends on the caching. There's a lot of problems with it. And Western Digital got sued back in 2021 for using SMR and not telling their customers that the drives they were selling were SMR drives. I mean, a lot of people don't like them. But the whole CMR SMR debate thing's been raging for quite a few years now, and with fans of spinner drives talking about a lot. And it seems that most people have opted away from SMR tech, but it could just be bad marketing or something. Anyway, the story seems interesting, but their sample size seemed kind of biased and small because they were looking at drives that have been sent to them to be repaired. So they're only seeing drives that have failed. And they were drawing a lot of broad conclusions from a very limited data set. But you might like to read about it, which was why I included it. I mean, I focused on SDD drives, a lot lately. I used to do a lot with spinners, and I used to build a lot of spinner, data storage units and things like that. I still have some. But, they said the average life expectancy of hard drives at the end of 2022 was 3.6 years. And in 2020, it was down to 2.8 years. Now, I don't know how scientific that is. And are they just measuring failed drives or what? I've got drives that have been running 24/7 for more than 10 years, and they're still sitting there running right at this very moment. So I don't know. It's an interesting article. The sun and moon weep clouds. The clouds fall as rain into the lake, and the raindrops are drunk by the fishes, is a Tang Dynasty poem written by our resident poetry expert, Jason Wood. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Doug. Good to be back with you again. So this article was published on the 17th last week by the Register, basically detailing how a threat actor, which has been named or dubbed UNC 3886, has been using a vulnerability in the operating systems of Fortinet devices, and this is like the firewalls, the VPN devices, pretty good spectrum there. The vulnerability has been labeled CVE 2022-41328, and I emphasize the 2022 in that, and we're just talking about this in March of 2023. The patch was actually released on March 7th by Fortinet, and but the activity actually dates back into, as we learn in this report by Mandiant, actually that's kind of behind this, back to September-ish or so in 2022. So now UNC 3886 is a designation that's being used by Mandiant at this point to track the group. They're saying that they look like they're a Chinese based threat actor group, but they're really not, don't have a lot of information. This is fairly new, again, since September 2022 is when this was first mentioned. So there's still a lot to learn about it. And these things evolve over time. So there are two things that jumped out. We basically have VPN devices being exploited by nation-state adversaries. And there are two things that jumped out to me immediately when I read this report and some other articles. First, this article, this type of activity is really sounds kind of similar, or pattern, similar pattern that we see with other VPN devices being targeted for exploitation, because let's face it, they make a great point of presence into an environment, and you can't install third-party software on them to do security monitoring for the most part. So they're pretty ripe for the pick in there, and you have access to a lot of stuff like credentials and whatnot passing through them. So this is something that's very much a target for threat actors. We've seen vulnerabilities before in FortiGate devices as well as SonicWall that have been exploited. The second thing that I thought of, though, is that I expect that sometime in 2024, we're going to be talking about this vulnerability again, because you're going to have a group of people organizations that patch it, and then a group that don't. And then later some e-crime adversary is going to get a hold of it and launch some kind of campaign. And so we'll probably be talking about this, let's say, February next year or something like that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and just dig into the vulnerability itself and some of its impact. The flaw itself is actually a directory path traversal flaw that allows the attacker to upload any file to the system as long as it's smaller than 64 kilobytes or 65,535 bytes. and it can basically replace any legitimate file on the system. Now, the function that's being exploited basically allows, it's kind of in the management interface, allows the users to upload icon images to FortiGate firewalls, for example, for registration portals, wireless registration portals. So, then, the attacker uses that to just dump this file wherever they want to go. What's interesting here, you got a combination of two things. According to Mandiant, the only checks on the validity of the file was, is it less than 65,000 bytes? And that's it. They don't check the file type or anything like that. That's all it was, purely a size check. Combine that with a directory traversal flaw, able to write to any location, then you end up with malicious binaries being executed on these devices. Attackers also used legitimate looking file names, matching and mimicking other file names on the system. So we're just trying to make things just a little bit more difficult for the defenders to spot what's going on. Now, this access has been used to install additional malware, does stuff like steals credentials, and maintains access to the victim's networks. Basically, they have a backdoor that they install on the compromised device, and that gives them administrator access to it. From there, Mandiant said they observed the attackers then pivoting over to ESXi hosts inside the environment using SSH. So they've got some kind of credentials already, or they've gotten credentials off maybe these VPN devices. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. Just credential reuse. Who knows how they did it, but they're getting into the ESXi host using SSH, and then deploying additional malware. One of the names was Virtual PETA, which I really liked because pain in the butt. But I suppose they went off something else because the other malware is Virtual Pi. So I guess we're going off of baked goods. Anyhow, that allowed the attackers to then have their point of presence on the ESXi hosts. And they could do things like run commands inside of guest hosts that are then running on that infrastructure. Now, if that sounds familiar, that is because Mandiant reported on the activity on the ESXi host back in September of 2022. However, there was no mention of the FortiGate activity until last week. Now, since the CVE is tied to 2022, I suspect that this is because they observed the malicious activity, but it took a little while, maybe as they're gathering information, or for the vendor to basically get a patch ready to go. And since the patch was just released on March 7th, a little earlier this month, I'm going to assume that we're giving the vendor time to get a fix out there. Now, I do have one concern about this CVE, basically because the National Vulnerability Database gives 2 CVSS scores for the flaw. The first was issued by NIST itself, and they come in at 7.1, which is a high severity flaw. But then there's the CNA score, which is driven more by the researchers or the vendor or other parties, and that's really rated lower at 6.7. Go look at the Fortinet Bulletin, they drop it again down to 6.5. Now, that's not a huge gap as far as points, but it is a big change when you go below 7.0, because that takes us to now a medium severity CVSS score. And I know of some organizations that say, well, we have different SLAs or timeframes for patching something that's medium. It's not that important. And so I could see somebody grabbing a hold of that lower vulnerability score or CVSS score to try and avoid having to patch these devices because downtime and things like that. But what's really important to note to me is that a threat actor is actively using this right now and exploiting these devices to great effect inside their victims' environments. So, if this applies to you, you have these devices, do your best to push back on anybody, trying to play this down a little bit. Because again, this is being actively exploited. Now, the Mandiant blog post, which I also have in the show notes, has a lot of excellent information for users of Fortinet devices, basically so they can go out and hunt for signs of exploitation in their environment. They've got the files that have been modified, web files, as well as where they're finding binaries being dropped on the systems, Python scripts, things like that. Log entries that would appear when payloads are being dropped on the host, configuration changes that were being made, like firewall rules on them. So if you use Fortinet devices, I would highly recommend checking out this report and pulling out these details and then examining your devices for signs of this type of activity. Obviously, the first and primary benefit is have we been owned here. But even if your organization hasn't been attacked with it, hasn't been compromised, it's still great practice to go through the process of extracting this information out of a bulletin that's out there, some kind of open source intelligence, getting the relevant bits of data, and go through the process of examining the devices inside of your environment. That makes it a whole lot easier later if you have to do this under fire. So I also look at this as a good time to just brush up on some skills and practice. The couple final thoughts I really have on this is just to keep in mind that these types of devices are definitely being targeted by threat actors. Again, most of the time they can't run third-party security software, so you're dependent on logging and stuff like that. So, for us, we need to be able to know what, get a pretty good baseline. What are the normal log entries being made? What's the expected network activity? Should we see this thing doing some kind of ping knocking inside our environment? Because that's one of the things this group was doing. And can we spot that? So be actively looking for it. Don't just wait for something to send you an email or a text message and say, hey, you've got a problem. And this report by Mandiant has a lot of great information to help you out in that process to see, really what we know about the flaw, and so you can for that as well. And then finally, obviously, timely and thorough patching is necessary here. Like I said, I expect we'll be talking about this next year when an e-crime group picks up on this and says, hey, we've got code, we can scan around and see if we can find this and exploit these devices. And the problem with e-crime groups is they tend to cause damage. That's their goal, to get you to pay up. State-sponsored groups, a little more interested in staying out of sight and just looking and maintaining access. So while we don't want them there, they're generally less disruptive than the e-crime groups. And so I expect some kind of campaign to come out of this in the future when organizations don't patch, and they'll just start scanning, looking for vulnerable systems. I've included links to both the Register article if you want a high-level summary of what's going on, as well as the Mandiant report if you want to get into the details. Go ahead and check this out. Like I said, I think it's a great source of information and something to turn around and apply in our environments.
Thank you, Jason. I concur on all points. And finally, ChatGPT can apparently, I guess my teleprompter's frozen now. ChatGPT can apparently ace the LSAT test, but the studies were showing that when ChatGPT was doing the LSAT test, they got about, initially on the 3.5 version, they got like 6 out of 10 questions right. But on the new 4.0 version, they got 9 out of 10 questions on the LSAT right. And the whole article was then about is ChatGPT and Ernie and all these other bots that we've been talking about for the last few weeks coming for your job? And, I guess my response to that was, and the article's general response was that maybe, but it also doesn't seem to have the level of creativity that you might get from, say, an actual lawyer who may have to not just take the cases and all the briefs and all these things that are out there in the world, but may take those things and somehow merge them, meld them, and make them into something viable that could be used in an actual court case. So it may, like many things in the past, it may actually not be the Industrial Revolution. So this is, of course, the thing they keep comparing things to, which the Industrial Revolution was basically all of a sudden you can buy a tractor and you don't need all these humans to go out and work in your field. So it's put all these people out of work. And maybe some of those people were not educated enough or able enough to actually migrate and become operators in automobile plants. Now, for me, this seems more like something where it may well cause a paradigm shift in what you do. So as a professor, I can certainly see ChatGPT being able to put together a lecture. I mean, I've tested it, and I mean, I asked it, put me together a lecture on IP addressing and TCP/IP, and it actually put together a pretty reasonable thing. And I could certainly see a student using that, probably to turn it as a paper, which would be plagiarism and wrong, but it could certainly be a starting point. And if these kind of engines can take things and put them together for you, it seems like they may cause a paradigm shift, which will cause some people a great deal of distress, but it also may mean you can shift what you do into a different mode. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do with classwork for years, which is to shift away from just standing in front of a room full of people and lecturing, and actually trying to provide many different points to the material so that people can learn how to access that material and pull that information together in a better way, in a more productive way. I did have ChatGPT write a poem, but I can't get to it because the teleprompter locked up. So I'm not going to read it to you, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure you'll be depressed. But I do think it's something to keep an eye on. There's an interesting article about that, so you might want to check it out. That's the news. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Security Weekly News.